Welcome to State of the World. I'm Sally Lockwood in Israel.
And I'm Tara Palmeri in Brooklyn. Obviously not as interesting as where you are, but wow, Sal, you are in the center of it all. What's it been like?
I was on an airdrop flight over Gaza a few days ago with the Jordanian military. It's honestly one of the most outrageous stories, one of the most shocking stories I've ever covered.
To give you an idea of the effort involved, this is around 8 tons of aid, and in a lorry you could move around 20 tons by road.
We have Palestinian colleagues on the ground and they send us videos, many of which we never broadcast because they're just so horrendous, T. I mean, the images are shocking. What we put on television is a sanitized version of the stuff that I see on my mobile phone. I mean, those aid drop flights that are taking place now in Gaza because people are going hungry, they're not really making a huge amount of difference. And in fact, it's actually making it quite dangerous on the ground because there's now gangs that are controlling the food that's coming in and people are fighting for the food, and these gangs are apparently armed, and the really vulnerable people who the intention is to get the food to them, it's not getting to them.
This is what kills me when I hear this, and it breaks my heart, but also I hear from people on the other end who are defending Israel in this, saying like, well, why are the children, why are they the only ones who are starving and the men don't look like they're starving? And it's like, there's an example. Also, how are you supposed to get formula to kids?
I asked them what was in the crates that they were dropping, these pallets with parachutes on top. And there was baby formula, rice and flour, really basic stuff. Back to your question, Tara, about, the accusations that we see images of children that are starving, and then you see sort of men that look okay and pretty healthy and well fed. Yeah. And of course, Hamas are using these images as propaganda, but you can't fake all of it. You can't fake the images that I'm seeing in hospitals where, children look so ill and so frail and so thin. But the reality is, there are a lot of innocent people in Gaza at the moment who just want to feed themselves, and that should be a basic right, and it's against international law to deprive a civilian population of food during a war. And there is a huge amount of concern and outrage around the world, and it is absolutely awful, and I think it's deeply worrying that enough aid isn't getting through even now. Benjamin Netanyahu announced these new measures around a week ago, that they were going to have humanitarian pauses in order to get more aid in. They were going to have these airdrops, but enough still isn't getting in. There's a lot of lorries of aid held up at the border area that aren't getting in. I spoke to UNICEF the other day, and this guy from UNICEF said to me, we've got like emergency nutrition at the border and we can't get it in, and this isn't going to cure a child of malnutrition, but it will get them out of the danger zone, and that's still sitting there.
What do the Israeli people that you're talking to say?
So, for context, international journalists don't have access to Gaza. Israel is not allowing international journalists in, so we have to tell the story from the outside. I interviewed an academic earlier, this professor who said to me, October the 7th was a nuclear bomb for us, and that it's just completely eroded trust. Israelis are traumatized from what happened on October the 7th. It was like the worst thing you could have ever imagined to have happened to them.
Yeah.
And what's happened since, I think, unfortunately for Israelis, is that the response in Gaza has been disproportionate against the civilian population, and that is what has eroded empathy internationally for Israelis. So I think they found themselves now in a really tough spot, because they are losing support from their traditional allies. I interviewed a former Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu's predecessor, Ehud Olmert.
Israel is in complete control of Gaza. No one will tell me that we can devastate Iran 1,200 miles from the shores of Israel, and we can't make all the necessary technical logistical arrangements to provide food in the 20 kilometers from Israel.
He's been very vocal in the last few months with his criticism of what's happening in Gaza. Israeli human rights groups this week who have called it a genocide now.
So who is still on the side of the war besides Netanyahu, his followers? I mean, what percentage of of the country is that?
You know, I couldn't find one person on the streets of Jerusalem who was critical of Netanyahu, and there were two women in particular who are quite memorable. One woman, a French Israeli woman, said to me, "What you see on the news isn't true."
It's not real what you see on the information.
So the images we're seeing on television coming out of Gaza aren't real, is that what you're saying?
Well, yes.
And then there was another girl I spoke to who served in the IDF.
We give him a food, clothes, everything they need, and they're still killing us, and we give him things they need.
But Israel is also killing a lot of Palestinians as well.
It's not true.
It's hard to kind of get your head around, but there are those views out there that they simply don't believe the other side and they don't trust them, or maybe they don't want to. You know, people are still dealing with their own trauma here from October the 7th. There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of anger.
They still have direct missiles coming at them as recently as last month after the bombing in Iran. I mean, sure, they provoked that bombing, but it's not like they're not living in fear, I'm sure, as well, right?
Yeah, there's just a huge amount of trauma in Israel still. I think they're really struggling to deal with it. And I think there are like a large number of people in Israeli society now who are unhappy and uncomfortable with what is happening in Gaza and who are becoming very vocal and critical about it. But I think there's also a demographic who just don't have the headspace for that. They're still dealing with their own suffering. But look, it's on the radar in America now as well, which I think is so interesting because obviously America is like Israel's biggest ally, and I've been reading, you know, the American press, there's growing criticism for what's happening in Gaza from the States as well.
Yeah, no, it's a shift. MAGA has gone almost anti-Israel. I mean, they've always been isolationists, but I think the images are just too much, even for Americans, and they feel like they're being dragged into a war. The bombing in Iran was something that caused a big reaction among President Trump's political base. They were angered by it. President Trump is very much a visual president. He sees things in the eyes of a TV producer, and he realizes that what's coming out of Israel, the images, the videos, what's playing on TV, it just is not something Americans can support. And we as a country, we give millions and millions of dollars, in billions actually, in support to Israel. And I think there's just a feeling that they want it to stop. And yeah, it's hit a touch point here in American politics that I never thought, because we have this sort of like evangelical Republican base that has always, it's at its bedrock has been a commitment to Israel, but it's always had a bit of a more neocon core, neoconservative. And with the MAGA and the isolationist movement, America First, I think they're stepping away from that, and they have a different perspective on the global landscape, and they're willing to, in that whole isolationist stance, even step away from our longest allies, Israel.
So Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's envoy to the region, is here today at the time of recording. He went to Gaza with Mike Huckabee, the US ambassador to Israel, and they visited one of these aid distribution sites in Gaza. It's his first visit to Israel in 3 months, Tara. And I don't think it's a coincidence that he's come now when there's this international pressure, you know, that countries are just so angry and outraged at what's happening in Gaza. And there's a sense that the only person that could change Benjamin Netanyahu's course is Donald Trump, right? So he's probably getting international pressure after that trip to Scotland when he met Keir Starmer and Ursula von der Leyen. I'm sure they discussed it. Well, they did discuss it because on camera, Donald Trump acknowledged for the first time that people were starving in Gaza, which he doesn't normally break with Benjamin Netanyahu's lying, right? But publicly, he said, you can't fake those images. And he's right. You know, a lot of the decisions being made about Gaza are down to Benjamin Netanyahu's political career, trying to hold together his fragile right-wing coalition and not piss them off. And a lot of people are saying that's why he's continued the war in the way he has in Gaza. And then you've obviously got Donald Trump. It's like, well, you know, does he really care about Gaza, or is he just worried about his base? And could that result in a change?
No, I think the pressure is coincidence. It goes along with the fact that so many other countries are now recognizing Palestine as a state, right? President Trump is seeing these horrific images. He realizes it looks bad. I think he just thinks that it looks like there's chaos.
Do you think anything's going to come from this Steve Witkoff visit? You know, when he and Mike Huckabee went into Gaza today, Mike Huckabee tweeted, "We're here to essentially find the truth, learn the truth when it comes to the aid situation in Gaza." You know, and you've got one side, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which was set up in May, backed by Israel, backed by America, this controversial new mechanism for delivering aid to people in Gaza. It's been really widely criticized because it's being run by armed American security contractors rather than humanitarians like the UN, who have been doing aid in Gaza for decades. And there's a lot of criticism because they're not getting aid to everyone, and it's proved to be a bit of a disaster. And that was, you know, cooked up by Steve Witkoff and Benjamin Netanyahu back in May, and it's been rolled out. And, you know, when Steve Witkoff was here on his last visit in May, it was a very different backdrop. People were dying in Gaza, but they weren't dying from hunger in Gaza. They weren't starving.
So they cooked up this scheme and now they're dying, which is
Well,
crazy.
I mean, they rolled out this new aid delivery system because there were accusations that Hamas was looting UN aid at the border as it was coming in. Whenever I talk about aid distribution in Gaza, I always get someone or a pile of people on Twitter saying, yeah, but Hamas is stealing the aid. Well, look, you know, the UN have always said it's not a perfect system, but the stuff that was being taken the amount was negligible. You've now had like internal US government research, which was leaked, and that has said actually not a huge amount of aid was being stolen by Hamas either. And you've also had senior Israeli officials who've broken from the government line and spoken to Israeli media saying the same, okay? So that, you know, perhaps imperfect system was still working pretty well. You know, everyone in Gaza was able to access food through these kitchens that were being run by the UN, through bakeries. And now there's these 4 sites that people have to try and get to get food. And the boxes that they're given have enough food in for something like 3.5 days for 5 people. So every 3-4 days, they're going to have to go and do the same journey again, which is super dangerous. I've spoken to Palestinians who say to me, I don't go to these sites. I try and buy it from people who do because I'm too scared, because they're too dangerous, because you see what happens to people when they go there. And on top of that, what's in these aid boxes, very often you need like water and fuel to cook the food, which, by the way, a lot of people in Gaza don't have. They don't have access to water, certainly not clean water or fuel for cooking. So, you know, these humanitarians who've been working on aid distribution for decades know all this, and they are the experts at delivering aid in these sorts of situations. And then you've got this new organization that was rolled out in May that aren't experienced, and not only has it proved lethal, you know, 3 months later, you've got a UN-backed body that specialize in food crises internationally this week saying we're seeing the worst case scenario of famine rolling out in Gaza. 3 months after America and Israel launched the new aid system, 3 months later, you've got that verdict that the worst case scenario of famine is playing out in Gaza. I mean, you know, people are calling on the UN to be allowed to run it again and to let ground convoys of aid come in. It's just, the whole thing is such a mess. And if you listen to what Steve Witkoff and Mike Huckabee said in Gaza today, they were very defensive of the GHF and their efforts with these aid sites. But the system is super flawed, because the situation that we're seeing in Gaza now is just desperate. You know, 1/3 of the population haven't eaten for several days, Tara. that's not sustainable, and there's no time to waste. They need help now. It's not a case of like sounding the alarm anymore. You know, there's no time for that. And I think that's what's really scary. You know, I spoke to a guy the other day who's a source of mine. He's a teacher normally, right? And he's now living in a tent with his 3 kids. And he said to me, Sally, I went to go and find food for my kids, and it took me 2 days, and I came back with some chickpeas.
Wow.
That's the sort of text message I'm receiving. And so when people want to have these big political fights with me on Twitter, don't bother. I don't even read it anymore, because I know what you're going to say, and you sit there in your armchairs at home with your political views and the comfort of your privileged life, and I'm receiving messages from people who can't feed their kids. And I'm saying to you, stop. It's not about politics. This is about humanity. And no one from any creed, race, or country should want to see another child not be fed, or even see it. It's not a case of wanting to see it, it's a case of seeing it and thinking it's okay.
I mean, that was incredibly powerful, and I agree with you. And I also want to say to all those people that direct message me, would you want to be in Gaza right now?
You know, anytime I talk about Palestinian suffering, people say, yeah, but Hamas are using them as human shields. Hamas are doing this, Hamas are doing that. And yeah, Hamas are also to blame. Hamas have not cared about the people of Gaza, have not given a damn about Palestinian civilians. If they did, they would not be holding the hostages. They would hand them back to Israel and and surrender, because this is not in the interests of the Palestinian people. And I know that a lot of Palestinians can't speak openly to me about that on camera, because you know, they can't say, oh, by the way, we don't support Hamas anymore, and this is what they're doing to us, and this is what they're saying to us, because their lives would be at risk. So you don't
we're living under a terrorist regime.
So you don't hear that on camera.
Right.
But believe me when I say there are those innocent civilians in Gaza. All they want is what you and I want, which is to live a safe life and be able to feed our children and to give our children opportunity and dreams. And they have none of that right now. It's just the worst situation, and it's such a mess. And I can't, at the moment, see what change is going to happen. Ehud Olmert, former Prime Minister, I interviewed him this week.
There is one person in the entire world which has the power to force it on Netanyahu, and this is Donald J. Trump. What he needs to do is to summon Bibi to the Oval Office and to say to him, Netanyahu, game is over. Enough is enough.
Enough is enough. And I wonder if that's going to happen. You know, I've heard today that there's a new plan that on this visit with Steve Witkoff here, I've heard reports in the Israeli media that Israel and America have a new plan for Gaza. We don't know what that is yet, but I don't think there's a huge amount of confidence in America and Israel's solutions, given what, you know, a lot of people here have seen so far, what a lot of Palestinians have seen so far in terms of like this latest aid situation. I don't know. Do you think Trump will say that to Netanyahu? Do you think he's going to make a difference?
I don't know, Sal. Depends on what's on his plate that day. Also, is talking about pardoning Diddy half the time. So who the fuck knows, you know? So if he wants that, you know, Nobel Peace Prize, humanitarian, but at the same time, he could have said this a while ago.
Let's see. I mean, we keep talking about cautious optimism. People are trying not to lose hope here. They really are. But there's not a huge amount of trust in what America and Israel will do next. No. There are victims on both sides, and you should, you know, have empathy for the Israelis over October the 7th. You should have empathy for Palestinian civilians trying to survive in hellish conditions in Gaza, and to try and justify one for the other is not okay.
Yeah. Sally, thank you so much for your time. And I want to thank all of the new listeners and viewers of State of the World. We love our audience, the community. Thanks for joining us.
Hit like if you've enjoyed the episode. Please share it with your friends. Tara and I are completely independent. There's no media company behind us. Hit subscribe. It's completely free. You'll see when the next episode drops. See you soon.